All right. Good to see everyone and good to have you online. So we just wrapped up teachings on the Noble Eightfold Path, and we're in a transition period to start a new topic, and we're also going to introduce a course on Buddhism, an actual evening course. And so I thought today would be a great opportunity to ask a question. So what's it mean to be a Buddhist? And a little bit provocative, if you put it that way. Or what is a Buddhist, or what do Buddhists believe in? And I think it's a valuable question to explore. A lot of people might be here because they have an interest in Buddhism. Some people might be thinking of themselves as Buddhist, and some people might be wondering what a Buddhist is. And fundamentally, it's an interesting question to ask people who even practice the path, who go to retreats, who do practice. What makes you a Buddhist? I've had people contact me and say, I would like to become a Buddhist. How do I do that? So I thought it'd be good to explore those questions and see if we can find some clarity in your own path, your own questions, or also I suspect that it might offer an opportunity to ask some questions and have a little dialogue around what would be a perspective of a Buddhist on something, and what's a distinguishing factor that may or may not be something that would help in that path. And there's actually Buddhists who say that the fact that you say you're a Buddhist makes you not a Buddhist. Other Zen people, they're very much like that. You're identifying with a concept. How could you be a Buddhist? So I thought I would open with that and encourage questions as we get into this a little bit. And those of you online, you're able to raise your hand and we can patch you in with a question as well. And I think we should start a very simple thing. The Buddha did not invent Buddhism. And the idea of what the Buddha basically shared, his big awareness, was that we're just not living in reality very well. And, fundamentally, all he basically was trying to do is, this is the nature of things. And so, in a nutshell, the key component of a path in Buddhism and the key to liberation is simply knowing the truth. So it's a very investigatory process. What's the nature of self? What's the nature of this place I'm living in? What's the nature of things? And, what is reality? And that's really all Buddhism about, is tools to know the truth. And so there's no belief system wrapped in that. You have to investigate what's true. And so I personally like that because, I can be rather skeptical. And I like the opportunity to explore, to challenge, to question, to discover. And then something's sure it's not true. So we have a big emphasis at the monastery I was trained in on debate. Everything's debatable. You get, which is not always very fun. We would, and it's great because, we have sort of a hierarchy. We have, lamas who've been trained. We have geshes who've been trained. There's a hierarchy at the monastery. But when it comes to making a decision, hierarchy's out the window. So you get 5 monks trying to load a truck. It's going to take all day because everybody's got an idea. And it used to drive me nuts, because the lowest monk would have an input. And if we're going to make a decision about, the Kamsen that we lived at, well, it's a community decision. Yeah, you have leadership, people vote and all that, but then everybody, we can't get anything done because we're talking about how to do it. And so it's real interesting that, people have a voice and we explore things. And, I need to have an open mind around allowing other people that opportunity. So there's that real wonderful piece of exploration, of inviting different voices, different opinions, but it's got to hold up. So debate's very important, and everything gets debated, including what we're going to have for lunch when we traveled. So, so with Buddhism, there is this idea of I really want to know what's true, and the fundamental root cause of our mental and emotional suffering on a Buddhist principle is simply confusion. That's why I suffer. I suffer because I don't know who I am, and I suffer because I don't see things accurately. And that's what creates all my confusion. And if I actually saw things accurately and knew who I was, I wouldn't suffer. Wouldn't create all this nonsense. I wouldn't attach to things in a way that they're not. And then I wouldn't suffer. And so if we attack this line of thought, well, then we can start to say, well, Buddhism is an exploration in knowing the truth. And so is that any different from somebody working in a lab, or a biologist, or a physicist? Does that make them a Buddhist? They want to know it's true too. And within Buddhism, there's lots of methods and tools to start to unravel the misperceiving mind, and what makes, and I'm going to use His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I think he's a good resource. He talks about three distinctive qualities of Buddhism. So does anybody here know whether Buddhism is a religion or not? I love that question. You don't know, or you don't think it is? I don't think it is. You don't think it is? You don't think it is?
It can be.
He says it can be. Have you ever heard somebody say it's not a religion, it's a philosophy, right?
The safest response is it depends.
Yeah. It depends. And, I hear a lot of people, it's not, but, there's these temples, and there's these monks, and there's this prayer, right? It looks kind of religious. And then there's the science of the mind, and I think the best answer I heard was from one of my teachers, who says it just doesn't fit either category. That those are Western mental constructs. That a religion fits in this box and a philosophy fits in this box. And what I think when we look at, and the way His Holiness describes it, is Buddhism has these sort of three unique attributes, and one is science of the mind is one quality. And the science of the mind is interested in our subjective experience of thoughts and feelings and emotions and how they work. We call that cognitive behavioral therapy. And having that experience of how thoughts arise and how emotions are related to thoughts and perception, and how that interplay happens. So that's an aspect of Buddhism. They've been doing this science of mind for, over 2,000 years. Nothing very religious about that. And then the next one is what he calls Buddhist philosophy. So Buddhist philosophy is interested in ethics, and it's interested in sort of logic and reasoning. That's why we debate a lot. We question things a lot. And so, one attribute is this area of the science of mind, of subjective experience. And one is philosophy, ethics, and reasoning, logic, the way they approach things. And then the third category, he would say, is Buddhist religion. And in that category, he places things like karma, prayer, belief in multiple lives, life in that. And he kind of puts that in the religious realm. So that it doesn't really fit in a particular box neatly, one way or another. And so if we start to think of religion or philosophy as just sort of Western constructs, how you define a philosophy or how you define a religion, it doesn't really fit in those. It's really not so neatly applied. Is it religious in nature to know the truth? I don't think that's particularly religious in nature. Is it? But when you think about religion in terms of monastics and temples, prayers, rituals, yeah, it's very religious. So, yeah, it's an interesting overlay there. And some people just aren't very, they're very adverse to religion. They've had experience. So some people are much more comfortable in not going into religion, and then they can come in. So I say, well, come on in. It's not a religion. And then some people take a great deal of comfort in religion, in ritual and prayer. And I say, well, that's okay. Come on in. Let's have some ritual and prayer and help each other. So if we start, though, then to explore, Buddhism's going to understand that there's no such ultimate thing as a religion or a philosophy. Those are just concepts in and of themselves. There's nothing more than an idea about them, and that there's cultures where those words don't mean anything because it's not in their vocabulary. It's not in the way they think. Then we'll start unpacking the Buddhist path a little bit, and I think that's valuable. So if at any point you have a question or a comment, please indulge. So what makes a Buddhist? So what do Buddhists believe? And a really good approach to this is what we call the 4 seals of Buddhism. So seals, if it has these 4, you could say it's Buddhist. That's kind of you got the stamp, the seal technically. The seal of the seals, I don't know if that works very well. But it's sort of this idea of what makes something a Buddhist is these 4. If these 4 seals are present, it's it fits into Buddhist teachings. Okay, and you're going to find that what I'm going to say doesn't necessarily mean that the Buddha said any of what these seals are. So for the first seal is very simple. Things are impermanent. Everything that comes together, composite phenomena, is impermanent. So this body's impermanent, this table's impermanent. My sowing the seeds of kindness cup is impermanent. The water I'm drinking is impermanent. Things change. Composite phenomena of the world I experience, my body, everything in this is impermanent. It's changing. Everything, all the time. Including this microphone. And things come together, right? Causes and conditions, but their very nature is they'll fall apart. The very nature. There doesn't need to be an additional component. Causes and conditions are changing moment to moment. My birth is the cause of my death. It's, it's just the nature of things. Things change. It's impermanent. So that's either true or it's not. Right? Do we know anything that's not permanent? You know anything that is permanent? Is everything changing? Mount Sopris is changing. Yes.
So you say composite phenomena. Is there non-composite phenomena that would then be permanent? And composite, to clarify for my own mind, is composite phenomena, I mean it's made up of pieces, parts.
Yeah, it's not necessarily material in a sense. Phenomena that we experience coming together as a result of causes and conditions. And so I don't think we have to leave it in a material realm. Thoughts, are impermanent, right? Love is pretty impermanent sometimes. Couldn't live without you, can't live with you. That changed. So that changes too. But thoughts came due to causes and conditions. That's the in many this composite, And then so phenomena in a physical sense also is atoms and those things coming together that give rise as well. But even thoughts and feelings change too. And so the distinction I guess I was trying to use there is the, which we'll get to in Steel in a moment, but the samsaric world that we're experiencing and is always changing. So the world that I'm experiencing, the outer phenomenal world. So if we were to go to an internal world, you could be in this outer physical world of experience and see it accurately and not suffer, which is pretty interesting, but it's still changing. Things are changing. So we suffer a lot because of that, because we don't want things to change. And we actually forget that they do. We forget that our partner changes. You're not the person I married 20 years ago. You changed. My job changed. Carbondale changed. Things changed. My 2004 Volvo has changed. And so there's a very delusional way of perceiving things that don't change. I mean, how often do we know someone? We go, I know so-and-so. Do we? Do we know so-and-so? Have they changed at all? And is the person that I know a construct of my mind actually who they are? Or is it an aspect of them that I hold in my mind? And could my perception of them change? Sure. So in these four seals, the first one of impermanence, including this physical body, this John's not the same John that was here an hour ago, nor will it be the same one in a few minutes. It's changing all the time, everything, all the time. But it doesn't seem that way, right? And because it doesn't seem that way, we freeze things and we try to preserve things. And this creates a lot of suffering. Creates a lot of suffering. We try to make things permanent that aren't permanent. A lot of suffering. Including my plan for the day. That changes. I'm leaving tomorrow to go to Florida. Yeah, there's a hurricane coming. It's going to be a little interesting. When I made the plan, I didn't know there's going to be a hurricane coming. So I had to change to, I'm going to come back on Sunday, hopefully before the hurricane hits, because that probably wouldn't be as much fun. But things change, plans change, how we perceive things. Have we ever planned that vacation, that nice dinner out, that movie, the things that we're going to do, and it didn't turn out that way. Try to preserve something, take care of something, you know. A dear friend just passed away, you found out yesterday, right? Car accident. Not here anymore. This is really important to sit with because intellectually knowing this really doesn't help us from stopping to do it. We make things permanent in our brain. We got plans for next week, next year, when I get that degree, when I get this vacation, when I buy that house, when I get this car and all that stuff. And one thing about impermanence that I think is very subtly fascinating is that when I'm projecting the future, I can only project the future based on what I know today. And what I don't factor in is how I'll be different when that future comes. Because I can't factor it. I don't know how I'll be different, right? I don't know who will call me tomorrow. I don't know what life change might go. I don't know. I mean, how many times, one real incredible freedom around impermanence is our feelings. We can go through a very difficult breakup and be emotionally devastated and think no one will ever love me again, only to find out that somebody will love you again. And, life's very different. But at that moment, I can't see that. My perception is how I'm seeing the world in that moment is how the world's going to be. And so if I really understand that even my emotional state at a given point in time will change, right? We've all been really sad, haven't we? We've all gone through grief. We've all had those struggles, and that has changed. In that moment, didn't feel like it was going to. And then, as I like to say, and then it's Tuesday, right? And now I've got a whole different set of thoughts and worries and concerns or joys. But how many times have we been stuck there? And then what about this one? When this happens, I'll finally be happy. I want to talk about grasping. We're actually kind of getting to the second seal there, but my attitudes around things change. When I get this degree, when I get this house, when I get this relationship, when I get this whatever, then I'll be happy. I haven't made. Then we have all those things, and then mind says, well, when I get this next thing, or that next thing happens. So you can see how now Buddhism's already starting to go, well, I misperceive things a lot. I start misperceiving that my friends don't change, or Carbondale doesn't change, or that I'm changing, or that things are impermanent and the people that I know will come and go, and my relationships will change. Even my things I can eat changes, right? Yeah, I hope to God I never get allergic to banana splits. But there are people who are lactose intolerant, right? That would be tragic. I can already see the suffering thinking about it. But that does happen, right? People I had a friend who was allergic to strawberries, for like 10 years, and then wasn't allergic to strawberries after that. So even that changes. Conditions change, right? My stepson was lactose intolerant for a while, and now he drinks milk. Things change, we change. But we forget all that. And we think people are a certain way, things are going to be a certain way. And then we're shocked when things change. It creates a lot of suffering. That doesn't strike me as very religious. It's either true or it's not. So that's one seal of Buddhism, is to understand impermanence. Things come together, but their very nature is falling apart. Things come together, they fall apart. Things deteriorate, things change. And then the second one is where I was kind of already leading into, is everything in our experience, what we call our experience that we're having here, this world that we're living in, its very nature is what's called dukkha. And that's unsatisfactory. There's nothing here that can really provide you a lasting happiness, a well-being. There's nothing. Its very nature and dukkha, by the way, or samsara that we're talking about, is the world that we're experiencing that's contaminated. It's contaminated by misperception, right? So the world that I'm living in, the world that I'm experiencing, and it's not this world. It's my subjective experience of what we're living in. I'm seeing it through a lens that's contaminated. It's not accurate. It's filtered through what we call karma and klesha, mental afflictions, and this confusion and misperception, and this experience of samsara is always going to provide a dissatisfaction, a suffering of sorts. So that sounds like you might need to believe that, right? But that's either true or it's not. Is there anything outside of yourself that you experience that doesn't transform to create some type of mental or emotional suffering, or even physical? So that takes a little more investigation, right? Does the house you live in that you really love, does that ever provide a stress or a worry or a fear? Have you ever been in the house that you love and been unhappy? Right now, Laura's trying to track down a little drip in the roof. It's creating a little bit of stress of our house that she built. The things that we acquire, cell phones, a Thirsty Stone coaster, which can provide happiness, can also, it transforms, change. I could lose it, could not have it. You could be desiring having a Thirsty Cone coaster. They're very nice, pretty solid. Foam's there. Might create some desire in you. The interesting thing about desire, as soon as I have desire, what else do I have? Dissatisfaction. Things I feel good about, I might be proud of. And pride creates a little bit of some struggle oftentimes. And what if you don't recognize the value of something I'm very proud of? And what if I relate to that and my identity gets wrapped up in that? And what if something I worked for and created falls apart? I don't feel so good. So when we look at this nature of conditioned existence, they talk about in this experience that we're having, dukkha, 3 types of suffering. And suffering's I hesitate to use the word, because suffering, it seems like when I'm sitting in a jacuzzi drinking out of my Sowing the Seeds of Kindness mug and having a Thirsty Stone thing to rest it on, it doesn't feel like I'm suffering a lot, right? So suffering doesn't really capture it. It's just a translation. Some people translate as stress. There's a stress, a little bit of a stress or dissatisfaction, something that just can't quite be there in this sweet way of resting. And so 3 types of that. So one way suffering is very clear, that by the very nature of living in a conditioned existence that we are in, we're going to suffer, and one way is suffering of suffering. And that just means that we are all subject to experience physical pain. We're subject to experience grief, sadness, anger, resentment, jealousy, and suffering, right? I mean, we're very tangible. I can get sick. I might get stomach flu. That's the nature of things, right? We won't find any being that hasn't suffered, right? Just straight up suffering. So that I think is pretty clear. The second one's a little more subtle. It's called suffering of change. And that the very thing that brought me joy can also change to bring me suffering, right? My car gets stolen, that's creating suffering. My partner, doesn't attend to me in a particular way, that might create some suffering. The food that I have, right? Now, the common analogy, this is what Tibetan monks always teach, is apple pie, for example. I don't know if they eat apple pie, but it's a good example to use. Apple pie can't provide just lasting happiness. First piece, pretty good. Second piece, not as good. Third piece, now I'm in pain. That the very same thing that's bringing happiness can transition to not. And I had a little monk I used to live with named Lundrup. And he was the classic example of suffering of change. Like Tibetan lamas would always give food as an example. I rarely do that. But they would. And they would say, if you eat too much, then that food that's delicious and you can lead to indigestion and create suffering, right? So, Lundrup, he was my roommate. We lived together. Little guy, always happy, generally. But on momos, Tibetan momos, those are awesome little dumplings. It's momo night. He would get excited. He'd say, we're going to the center, man. We're doing momos. We're having a momo party. He's like, he's on. And I would just, I would watch this. It was a sick, twisted observation on my part. But I go, hey, yeah, momo party, momo parties, and they go to the center and everybody's making momos and they have momo eating contests. And then he'd come home and then I would wake up early in the morning. I would sit in the living room and I'd wait for him to come out. Every single time that he ever did this, he would come out going, oh, too many momos, and he would be miserable. And I found that just so fascinating. Because it's the same analogy that the lamas would always use like that. And now here's what happens, and he would know the teaching and he would do it, and I would watch, and with great joy, which probably wasn't very compassionate. But we do this, don't we? How much suffering do we create by just wanting things to be a certain way? Wanting to take care of our house, wanting to have something turn out a certain way, cooking a meal, wanting it to come out a certain way, things, being just so. And they're not just so, or maybe they are just so. And if they are just so, then what do? We want to keep it just so. And then it might change. And then even if everything goes just right, how long does that happiness last? I mean, have you ever really stopped to think about the longest period of time you've experienced just happiness without interruption? Wonder how long that was. Was it 5 minutes? Was it 6 minutes? Was it an hour? I mean, do you ever think you've actually been happy for a whole hour undisturbed? Without even the thought thinking, boy, I don't want this to end. Because then that thought gets in. How do I maintain this? What would your nervous system be like if you were happy for more than an hour? I don't know. And then there's this very interesting piece of thinking I should be happy. I find that one pretty fascinating. I think that a lot of source of suffering comes from thinking you should not be suffering. Man, I have all this anxiety. Well, you're probably anxious. Is it going to last? Probably not. But how much anxiety do I create thinking I shouldn't be anxious? And then worrying about not being anxious creates a lot of anxiety. Or, I'm just sad or I'm frustrated. Why shouldn't I be sad or frustrated? I'd be sad for a very good reason. I'd be frustrated for a very good reason. Is there another human being I've ever met that hasn't experienced being frustrated or being anxious or being sad. I haven't met that person. What if I knew that that's a normal human emotion? Why not? What I've never met, well, I don't know. I gotta put a caveat. A couple of people I have met, sort of. Of normal human beings I've met, what I haven't met is a normal human being that's just blissful all the time. Just haven't met that person. I've met His Holiness, who's pretty darn close, but I haven't been around him all the time, so I don't know. But my teacher, Geshe Gelsen up there, he's on your far right, and I was around him a lot. And he was pretty chill. But I don't know how normal he was. But in general, humans have emotions and feelings and thoughts and all that. And why would my mind think I shouldn't feel this way? Which is different from I don't want to feel this way. That's a little more healthy, right? I'm anxious. I'd rather not be anxious. That's kind of healthy. But when I think, I shouldn't, I need to fix something, there's a great deal of energy that goes into that. So many people I've just, visit with is just, yeah, why not be upset for a little bit? Probably won't last. But we think there's something wrong often as human beings if I'm not feeling great. So I think that's kind of an interesting form of suffering, that I think I should feel great all the time. And if I'm not feeling great or confident or empowered all of the time, I'm not okay. What about feeling insecure sometimes and knowing that that's okay? Or, myself personally, there's days I wake up and I do not got the mojo. I just don't. And I know I don't. It's not firing. And I think the biggest gift of Buddhism has been to understand, well, that's okay. That'll change. Today I just got no mojo. Got no energy, got no optimism. But I'm optimistic that I'll have it at some point. I'm optimistic that it's okay, that that's just the way it is. And there's an incredible ease that comes with knowing that I'm off today. And that's all, I'm off today. Don't have it. And if I'm smart, I'll tell my wife that. Please be patient with me today. Because I'm not, mojo's not there today, right now. So we create, the nature of this existence that we have is its very nature, suffering of change. And the suffering of change is very sneaky, because we fall into the trap of thinking that this thing, whatever it is going to bring me happiness all the time. I had this great teaching from this guy who just reenacted this relationship, this old couple. They're having breakfast. The guy's got the newspaper up, He's not happy with his wife, He just pulls the paper down. He goes, "You're not making me happy." Like that's her job. And do we sometimes get that idea that my partner, my friends, whoever it is, you should be making me happy. You should be acting in a particular way. And when you're not doing your job. Nemesis, you're not doing your job. You should be blowing my mind 24 hours a day. And we could have those expectations about how friends should be, right? Friends shouldn't let people down. It's a pretty common thing. And then the question is, have you ever let anyone down? By the way, I have many times. Can I still be a pretty good friend? I think so. Sometimes I'm not a very good friend because I let people down. Sometimes I forget appointments too that we made. But we can sit there and think that my friend should be like this, my relationship should be like this, my job should be like this job. You want to have that job that's just going to make it okay? Wow, man, when I get this job, a year later in that job, man, I have to go to work today. My life would be pretty good except my job gets in the way. I had a bunch of counselors. I was training counselors. And every one of them, they're coming in the room. It was a training we were doing, and they're coming in, they're burnt out, they're tired. Man, I have to do all this charting. I have all this charting to do. Charting, you have to chart on your clients. Nurses and doctors have to do that too, I imagine, right? A lot of charting. It's miserable. Got to do all this charting. And they're all coming in. They're all saying the same thing. So naturally, I used that as a lesson, and I made a lot of friends that day. Because I said, what's so hard about charting? That's the way you win friends. I said, remember what it was like when you wrote your first client chart? Whoa, how cool that was, man. I mean, I remember I was using words like flat affect, man. Like, I'm going to throw some lingo here. And here's the client, and here's what's going on. And I wrote that, and I'm excited. I'm a counselor now. And, I'm talking about my client. Back then, we actually had charts you had to open and do the whole thing. And how exciting that was. Remember what that was like? And you're like, yeah, they remembered. It was good. They wrote their first thing. They learned the language. They got their counseling skills. Was charting hard then? Oh, no, it wasn't very hard then. It was kind of exciting. So what makes charting hard now? Is it hard to sit at a computer? Is that hard to sit down? Is it hard to move your fingers like this? Is it hard to type words? Do you know the words you're typing? Is that hard? No, it's hard. What makes charting hard? The fact you don't want to do it. Be interesting. How much of our life do we do things that are not very difficult that are very difficult? What makes it difficult? Yeah. The fact I don't want to do it. Doing the dishes is not very difficult. Water, soap. Some people like doing the dishes. I think you should have some evaluations done. But I prepare. I try to bring the mind that I have plates, and it's these plates we get to nourish people with, and I get to wash these plates. So I do work myself into at least making it meaningful. So this is very important. So Buddhism, you notice what we're interested in is what's true. Where's the suffering coming from? Because as long as I think the suffering is coming from you or the dishes or the job or the charting, I am going to be looking in the wrong direction for well-being, right? Because the cause of my suffering isn't the charting. It's not doing the dishes. It's not my partner, right? Where's the suffering coming from? Mental and emotional suffering. Yeah, I listened to this talk from a very smart, funny monk. Some of you heard that, but he went to a prison, and went to do a talk at a prison, and I think it was Australia prison, and they were they're talking to him, and so he gave this talk. He said, "Can you stay?" He said, "Yeah, I'll stay. I'll stay. Here, have some tea with us, right? And we'll talk." And so they start asking questions. We never had a monk here. What's it like? He goes, well, we get up at, I think it was like 4:30 in the morning, And they're like, oh my God, you get up at 4:30. Do you have to get up at 4:30? Says, no, we don't have to get up. You can get up earlier if you'd like. And they're like, what? Ah, man, we don't have to get up that early, And then, we sleep on the floor in this little cushion. Sleep on the floor? I mean, we got, beds, and then they talk about what do you eat, and they only eat one meal a day. 1 meal a day? Like, we get 3 meals a day. And anyway, this goes on, and as they're telling things, the prisoners really felt bad for him. And, and by the end of the conversation, like, you should stay with us. Yeah, we'll take care of you, man. Your life will be way better. And the analogy that the monk came away with is, he enjoyed his life. He enjoyed the freedom, the simplicity of life. But what made, the prison life that they were in a prison was that they didn't want to be there, right? They actually felt pretty good about their situation, having talked to him. It was a lower security prison, so it wasn't as violent. But then his teaching was, what prison are we putting ourselves in? And every time we don't want to be where we are, all you have to do is want to be there. And you're no longer in prison. That's a really powerful thing, to just want to be where you are, because it is where you are. Not wanting to be there won't change that. So there's an incredible amount of suffering that comes from a mind that thinks things should be different than they are. I mean, just saying that is insane, right? Things are the way they are, and they're the way they are for causes and conditions that gave rise to how things are. Me, not the creator of the universe, think things should be different than they are. It doesn't really accord with reality very well. Me wanting things to be different than they are, that makes sense. Right? It's inspiring to change things that aren't healthy, to change things that aren't okay. Yeah, I want things to be different, so how would I do that? Well, unless I can accept where I am, it's going to be very hard to change where I am in a healthy and meaningful way. And I'll suffer a lot less in the process. So the second seal is that the nature of our existence is filled with the suffering. We have suffering, the suffering of change, and then this pervasive suffering that's underlying, that things coming together, falling apart, and that there's nothing out there that we can rely upon that's going to provide that happiness. And where does my mental and emotional suffering coming from? Where does it come from? And if I keep thinking it's from out there, I'm going to create more suffering. So it's a vicious cycle. Like, if I could just organize everything just so, then I could be happy. We spend a lot of time like that, don't we? The third seal is a little more subtle, and that is that the nature of my experience here, and I'm going to say it from the Tibetan view, is what we call the emptiness of self and phenomena. So that shouldn't take long to explain. And that's just the understanding of interdependence, would be a good way to put that. That how we perceive the world is not the way things are. The world appears to us very deceptively, very independent and isolated, but everything's actually interdependent and co-created in a sense of my experience. And so one of the more common ways of doing that, which I've done a lot, is the cup. Some people use a phone. I like to use myself, but is that a cup? Yeah, you're not. It's a cup, right? It holds water. It's got a handle. So what makes that a cup? Is it the handle? Does that make it a cup? Actually, yeah, I think it's a mug too, right?
It didn't have a handle for your cup.
I thought some cups have handles.
No, all cups don't have handles.
Really?
I don't know.
No, a teacup has a little handle because you got to put your little pinky out when you use it. Those are cups. So is it a cup or a mug?
Mug.
Okay, now it's a mug. It was a cup. Now it's a mug. What makes it a mug?
The handle.
The handle. But cups have handles.
Only teacup.
What happens if you put coffee in a teacup?
It's a mug.
It's a coffee cup. Is this a mug or is this a mug? I don't know. That's what I used to do when I went traveling. Instead of spend money in a little tourist place where you buy a coffee cup, with a, Fort Smith or whatever. Instead of buying the cup, because I have a lot of cups, I would take a picture of the cup with my thing. I'd call it mug shots, and then I'd have a souvenir from visiting Salem or wherever. I was cheap, but also I didn't need more cups in the cupboard. So what makes it a cup? Well, is it a handle? So if I take this handle off, it's no longer a mug, right? So the shape of it makes it a mug. Okay. Because if it was a different shape, it wouldn't be a mug. So if it was like a flute type shape, that wouldn't be a mug, right? Because mugs are all like this, right? But I've seen some mugs that I actually had this one that I really liked. It was a travel type. It was round and then it went to the big round base, so it was flat. And what I really liked about it, I actually drove it on the roof of my car, like 3 cities, and it was still there. I mean, yeah, it got caught in the rail, and yeah, it was pretty handy. But that was a mug, and it was a different shape.
Did it have a handle?
It did have a handle. It had a lid too, so it was a travel mug. So when you start breaking this down, when does it stop becoming a mug or a cup or whatever? And what are the attributes that make it a mug or a cup? Is it the material? Obviously not, because we could have metal, we could have wood, we could have different things. Is it the shape? Could be a different shape. Is it a handle? Could be a handle. Not a handle. There's could be a cup. If I started using this for flowers, it might become a vase. And so what you start to find is that the attributes don't make it a cup or a mug. These qualities, the handle doesn't sing. And if you were to start taking it apart, when does it stop being? When I break that, is it? And if it's in pieces. So the attributes don't add up to a mug. The qualities that I'm imbuing on a mug, is that a mug? Or is a mug a concept in my mind? A cat is not going to see this as a mug. Probably still drink the water though. Mm-hmm. So it is empty of the quality of a mug because we're bringing that concept. Some people think it's a cup still. I can see the eyes. So if we start to understand that even the idea of a mug, which is in my mind, it's not here, right? The idea of a mug, that's a concept, a mug, which is different than a cup, way different. And don't even get into it's a glass. But those are mental constructs, right? They're not here. And so we would say this phenomena is empty of the mugness, right? The mugness is something I'm bringing to it. It's merely labeled a mug. The only thing that makes us a mug is you and I call it a mug, and we agree it's a mug.
What is if you put pencils in it?
And it's a pencil holder. If you put an apple next to it, I'll think I'm a teacher with pencils and an apple and a desk. And so when we start to recognize that actually, even the fact that these are causes and conditions giving rise to having something that we call a mug, we needed the materials, we needed the kiln that fired it, we needed the people that made it, we needed the machines. In this case, would be a factory one. There's an incredible amount of causes and conditions and physical phenomena and materials that interdependently arose for me to have a cup and a need and a desire to get a cup, and somebody would buy it in a store, and all those things that gave rise for this phenomenon that looks very independent of me and the cup all by itself, which I couldn't experience except for the person who needed a job who worked in a factory where they could maybe be getting the materials to make it, or they might be firing a kiln, or they might work in that place, or the person who drove the truck who needed a job, and the people who made the truck, and all the causes and conditions to transport this cup to a store where someone might buy that in a particular time and place. And how it wound up here, I'm going to guess from a thrift store, because that's how I shop. And how did the thrift store arrive? Causes and conditions, and people that need things, and people that donate things and give rise to things in a situation. It gave rise for me to have an experience of hot water, which arose because Aaron brought that cup here, because I had my yellow one here, which I like better. But that's okay. I'm grateful that there's water. And we miss all that, because I just see a mug with some lukewarm water. And I drink it, and I think it's separate from me. And I don't see all the people and the beings and the causes and conditions that gave rise for me to have some water that's clean and healthy in a ceramic thing that we call a mug. And that's the nature of things. They're interdependent arisings. There's nothing independent. There's no way this thing would be here by itself. There's no way it will stay stable by itself. There's nothing independent about this mug. There's nothing independent about this cloth, this microphone. There's a constant flux of interdependence that's arising. And everything is dependent upon causes and conditions, interactions. And then ultimately, the label is what I apply to something, which is a mental construct. And I have the karma to see it as a mug. A cat does not see a mug. Dog does not have a mugness. I wonder what they'd call it. And the world that I experience is all through my own lens of my own conditioning of karma and klesha, of culture, of being raised in the world that I was raised in, and my experiences and what's been brought to my mind to label this and see it in a particular way where I might like it and somebody may find it boring, and then I might say, this is a great cup. And someone else goes, I think that's really a boring cup. This is a delicious meal, and somebody else doesn't like that meal. But we don't see any of that. We see everything as this is the way it is. And it's empty of the deliciousness. It's empty of the attractiveness. Some people find certain things attractive and other people don't find it attractive. Some people find some people funny and some people find them annoying. But we think that person's annoying. We think that person's funny. We think this food's delicious. We think this is healthy and that's not healthy. Phenomena, the world that we experience, the self that we experience is interdependent, constantly changing, and subjective. The world I'm experiencing is different than the world you're experiencing. We don't even need to get into color, right? That's a whole thing, right? There's no maroon there. That's a whole physics thing. It's about light spectrums and vibrations and things, and how our eyes can only see a sliver, and how things make sense. But color, there's no photon that has color. It doesn't have color, but we perceive it to be, right? But I see a maroon mug. If you're colorblind, you won't see a maroon mug. And if you're not colorblind, you probably see a different shade than I do. But we don't see all that, right? We see a maroon mug or a cup. And we think that's the way the world is. So the world is empty of these qualities that we actually apply to it. We're bringing the labels and the concepts, and we're filling in the details. The human body's mostly water, so I like to see a bunch of water sacs, like 75%. It's pretty interesting, a bunch of water sacs. And then I like to think of it as a coloring book I'm experiencing, but I'm the one coloring in the details. Funny person, interesting person, tall person, short, I start filling it, but it's a subject, and I'm bringing something to how I'm experiencing you. You're bringing something, but I'm bringing something. But none of that's objective and independent. It's interdependent. Yes.
Question from online. I'll read it out.
Only if it's an easy one. Otherwise, act like you can't.
Newberries.
That's not going to be easy.
So, how does seeing the mug/world as empty of inherent nature translate to decreasing our suffering? How does the knowing we all have different subjective experiences make the difference?
Oh, great. So how does knowing that this is merely labeled a mug reduce your suffering? In a very simple way is that when I understand interdependence, or the fact that I'm filling in the picture, it removes the implication that if these things were different, I would have this experience. And it implies that if I were different, this would be different. So the locus of control, as the Western psychological perspective would put, is I understand that if I want to change the world I live in, I change the lens through which I experience it. And the understanding there becomes that if I change my karma and eliminate the mental confused afflictions, I'm going to stop sticking deceptive labels on things in ways that aren't true, in a way that creates the suffering. And what we'll start doing is an unraveling of seeing an objective, quantifiable world out there that is causing me to be this way or that way, and understanding that the nature of this is subjective. As I change, this changes.
Is it still a cup?
So an accurate, let's ask a different question. Is it a proper designation to stick the label of a cup on?
Yeah.
Sure. I think we could agree that that would be properly labeled a mug. I wouldn't call it a cup though. Microphone. Microphone. It would be silly to call that a microphone, right? Unless you tied a string to it and had another one, right? So the knowing of things more accurately, and the more that I'm not going to get to the fourth seal. So we're going to have to pick this up. The unraveling of the misperceptions of how I see things can eliminate suffering in a wide range of ways, one of which is understanding that I'm bringing something to my experience, and it gives me the opportunity to alter how I experience something, sometimes in real time. But so, for example, the charting I used, or the washing the dishes, merely changing my perspective about that can change my experience of it. So that's in real time. On a much grander scale, understanding that how I'm experiencing you is a result of my confusion and my past imprints and habits and tendencies. The karma I've created to see and experience things in a particular way empowers me to understand that how I experience you today gives me the opportunity to change all my karma for the future. And when you get that, that eliminates suffering. In other words, there's not a single person, event, thing in my life that doesn't offer me the opportunity to cultivate more compassion, more wisdom, more merit, and to see more accurately, or to grow, is another way to put it. You are all the cause of my enlightenment. Every event that's happening in my life is an opportunity to be a better human being, to be a better practitioner, to be better using this life that I have. And that's a very empowering thing. It's either true or it's not. Is there a situation in your life that ever arises that does not allow you an opportunity to grow and learn? Is that true or not? What if you actually knew that was true? And then I stop resisting the negative things that I perceive and use them for growth. As a matter of fact, how do we get our character and our stability, through difficult times? But there's a lot of suffering that goes when I think my friend shouldn't die. And my things, the nature of things. I struggle with just that life is messy and people die, and that's the way things are. So that's where understanding this interdependence and the conceptual mind that labels things, if I start to understand that dynamic, I can start to lessen my perception of seeing things as hard and physical and causing these emotions that I'm having. And understand that I can create karmic imprints to see things differently. And we haven't got to that seal yet, or thought process, but does that hopefully answer your question, Katie?
She gave a thumbs up, yeah.
That Katie's a smart one. She's a practitioner. So the fourth seal, very simple. We'll just say it out loud. Is so first off, any of those three things religious?
What is religious? What is religion?
I'm thinking it's a concept and a label. But if we were to categorize, would you have to believe anything particularly? Could, things are impermanent. These outer circumstances that we experience are filled with stress and suffering of some sort in the human condition. And the idea about labeling and emptiness, that's just physics and quantum physics. I mean, it's very clear that we get that. It's not that rocket scientist that cup's a concept, Plato and the wall, and that stuff goes back to the Greeks and wisdom traditions. Nothing new there, nothing novel. We just forget it. Fourth one now might make it Buddhist. And that is that there is a liberation from this. It's often framed as nirvana is peace, liberation, nirvana is peace. In other words, that all of this is unnecessary. We can be liberated from misperception and not be subject to any type of mental and emotional suffering, or that we can be liberated. That fourth seal kind of sticks it on there. And so that's either true or it's not also. So those four seals, so if a teaching includes this impermanence, the nature of dukkha, and this empty nature of phenomena and self, and that there's a liberation from it, you now have a Buddhist teaching. Does believing any of that make you a Buddhist? Different question. Which maybe we'll unpack next week. So I'm just going to check in to see if anyone has any questions or comment before we do dedication. And that includes those of you online. Yes.
John, what was the original question? What makes a Buddhist?
Yep.
I'm experiencing disconnect between the four seals and what makes Buddhist.
Okay. So the four seals make something a Buddhist teaching. So for something to be a Buddhist teaching, it would contain those four seals. So we're starting with that's what Buddhist teachings are. And now if you're a Buddhist, you might be embracing those teachings. And so basically we've just laid the foundation for next week's discussion on. Then let's say that makes sense to me and I want to follow these teachings. Does that make me a Buddhist? But in order to start to answer that question, we think it would be helpful to know what Buddhism is and what a Buddhist teaching entails. And I think, what I'd like to talk more about next week is there's different branches of Buddhism. There's different viewpoints on Buddhism. What's, I think, common, that's why I picked the four seals, is that's pretty common through all of them. And so in a Theravadan, as a matter of fact, so the way I framed it isn't actually true to all of them. Theravadins aren't going to get into emptiness of phenomena. They're going to get in emptiness of self. So they're not really going to get into, that's a Mahayana perspective. Glad you brought that up because that allows clarity. Yeah. So that's why I'm picking the four seals, is that those are universal. So here's what Buddhists believe, regardless of Theravadan, Mahayana, Zen, Tibetan. And now we can start to say, well, okay, these are Buddhist teachings, and then these four noble truths, how they fit in that. And then if I start just being a human being who starts questioning the nature of things, does that make me a Buddhist? Or not? Or maybe I want to be called a Buddhist. Who could care less? I know most people that a lot of people I practice, they don't even say they're Buddhists. But, you know, these things are helpful as human beings, right? And then I got friends who are very Buddhist who will say that they're not Buddhists because that wouldn't make them a Buddhist. It's a silly thing. Conceptual mind.
Well, the third seal invalidates the question you're asking, kind of.
Right. The Buddha is just a label. And, you know, the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. Right. And it's interesting because when they asked the Buddha, right, they came upon him, you know, in a very, very poignant question. What are you? You know, are you a human being? Are you a God? Are you this? Are you that? The Buddhist answered, I'm awake. And that's what it means to be, I just see clearly. Right? I'm not identified with human, this, that, the other. I'm just awake. I know who I am. And from a Dzogchen perspective, that's our fundamental problem. We don't know who we are. And so the real cause of mental and emotional suffering is we identify me and mine with that which is not me and mine. That's where all the suffering comes from. I really see myself very separate from you, and I have me and mine, and there's you and yours. And I don't know who I am. That's the Dzogchen. I don't know who I am. Yes.
Aren't several of these seals sort of counterproductive in a survival context? Like in essence, don't we have to pretend as if things could be permanent, as if our designations are meaningful, as you know, in order to?
Well, those are two different things. Life. So, do we have to pretend that things are impermanent? No, that just creates suffering.
No, pretend things are permanent.
Are permanent, right? That just creates suffering.
Like
I said impermanent.
Compound interest, like you know, I'm going to invest and have a retirement fund and stuff. I sort of have to believe there's some permanence to my life. It's going to last a certain amount of time, and you know, this phenomenon is going to take place.
No, because you could rationally think I may live 20 years or I may not live 20 years, but given this current situation, knowing that things change, this would be a good choice without any delusion that I'm going to live to 80. Thinking I'm going to live to 80 is going to create a lot of stress, and then people just try to decide when to retire or not retire because I have enough money now, but not if I live too long. And then, you know, there's a whole cycle of mental and emotional suffering. But the next question you said, don't I have to pretend that labels are meaningful? Well, labels are meaningful. You don't have to pretend that. You know, in a very conventional world we live in, labels are very helpful. When I tell you to get a mug, we get a mug. That's very helpful. It's very useful. The label John's very helpful, especially on my driver's license. And so labels are useful. They're functional. That's how we interact in the world. So just understand they're labels, so it's very helpful.
Sure. Okay.
But they're meaningful.
But what about marriage? You know, when somebody makes a vow saying, you know, we'll be together forever, which is really, you know, this one person in the subjective context of a moment in time, you know, saying, hey, I'm going to do this thing.
Till the wheels fall off, baby. Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems like you have to pretend as if that's a legitimate vow, even though in a sense it's, you know, obviously there is no permanent there and there can't be.
Yeah, but could you actually love someone if you didn't have all that context? For example, I firmly believe that if I have a misperception like that, I can't even love someone. To really love someone is to not be attached to them. Love, you know, it's a great saying by Robina Corton. Love never hurts, attachment does. if I really loved you, I want the best for you no matter what, whether I'm involved or not. I'm willing to extend myself for your growth, for your well-being. You know, to love someone is something we offer. It's not something that you do that makes me feel a particular way. uh, that's an experience of a feeling of a pleasurable moments when you act in a certain way. And then can I really love someone only when they treat me in a particular way and so forth? And then when they don't, I don't love you very much because now you're acting this way. And so what gets in the messiness of love is an attachment of how you make me feel when you act in a certain way, or we do certain things together in a particular way. And then it's not so much concerned about your potential and your growth and your highest well-being, because there's a lot of me in that.
But for those commitments to last, again, like I use the word as if. You have to pretend as if you don't know. And
Couldn't you just logically be, you know, the way I feel right now and the common ground that we share and the shared system of values and everything that I appreciate about you, I want to marry you, spend as much of our life together as we can. Wouldn't that be a reasonable thing?
it would be very reasonable, but that's not the vow that most people take. And I think it's interesting that, you know, we create these structures, these systems to lock us into greater permanence, or to sort of pretend as if things should be permanent.
Yeah.
And sometimes they have that effect of a forcing function that ends up actually prolonging something that might not otherwise have endured.
Yeah, or create a lot more suffering, saying in a relationship that's unhealthy and not very sustainable as well. But, you know, I'll tell you, my vows didn't say that with Laura. My brother even asked me, he said, in the vows was, and when we part, you know, we'll still love and appreciate, like, you know, my brother was like, wait a minute, there's something in your vows about when you part? Yeah, because we're going to part at some point. So can delusion or confusion create, you know, a sense of happiness or well-being? Temporarily, yeah, but fundamentally, you're going to be able to love more. You're going to be able to sustain more. You're going to suffer a lot less. And you'll actually be tired less. Suffering happens less when we really recognize our interdependence. I mean, imagine if you actually knew that these others in your life are invaluable to the best use of your life, just like your grandchildren or your children, and that you could love everyone as much as your children. And there's really no difference between them. Think about how much effort we show up for our children, and it's not tiring. But if you could do that for everybody, you know, there's an incredible source of energy there. And yeah, but it bears exploration. It's either true or it's not. I know you had a question. Are you good?
Well, I was just gonna say, if we all have Buddha nature, then we're all Buddhas.
That's right. Thanks for clarifying. Problem is, we don't really know that, do we? It's obscured. Okay. Well, we went a little bit over, but it was I think, valuable discussion. So we'll dedicate, and we'll pick this up next week. If I don't die, I'm here. And if you don't die and you're here, we'll do it again. It's a valuable use of my time. So let us dedicate the merit and the wisdom that we have accumulated here today, both individually and collectively and throughout our lifetimes. Let us dedicate this for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and find lasting happiness. May we be able to use the merit and the wisdom accumulated here today and throughout our lifetimes to purify our own minds, to help us see more clearly, to help us recognize our own Buddha nature so that we can truly be a benefit to all beings. And let us also dedicate our merit and wisdom for the long life of all the spiritual teachers of all spiritual traditions that are authentically teaching a path of no more suffering. May they live long and may their teachings flourish and ripen the minds of those who follow those teachings.